All right, here is part two of the topic of social media and social work practice. This one is going to focus primarily on the ethics of social media and how it integrates into practice and our professional lives. So here's some history on social media ethics and social work. In 2015, social workers on SAW primarily um, identify that we need to talk about this, that we are starting to enter into a gray area. Social media is present in both social workers and clients' lives. So, what does this look like when we are incorporating technology into our personal lives, into our practice, into our professional lives? So, a task force was created to identify the power and the impact that technology and social media was having and will continue to have on the profession. So they worked together to create some standards and principles. So by 2018, an updated NSAW Code of Ethics was adopted and it included 19 new standards related to technology. So they really saw the importance of really, in their very gray way, hashing out what it looks like when we start incorporating technology into our practice. So 2018, that's what, 8 years ago? So 8 years, it has been something that now social workers have to include in their ethical awareness. So some of the things that the new standards focused on during the informed consent piece, they now require social workers to discuss with the clients policies concerning the use of technology for service delivery and to obtain informed consent for use. So if you're going to be delivering teleservices, so doing therapy online, you have to have consent that that is what the client is agreeing to do as their modality of service. We have to assess clients' accessibility for technology for service delivery to make sure that no one is facing discrimination. So this to me is a huge piece that I always keep on my radar. I have been blessed with access to technology on my phone, at home, at work. And so doing teletherapy isn't something that I have to worry about an additional cost to. But not everybody has the luxury of being able to have internet access, whether that be for the cost of internet or accessibility in rural areas. Thinking globally, not all areas have access to technology as well. And so making sure that utilizing the platform of e-services doesn't discriminate towards people who just don't have access to the means. So we need to obtain client consent prior to conducting an internet search unless in case of emergency. So like I had said before when we've talked about um, looking up clients and their right to privacy. And we have to obtain consent in order to conduct a Google search on them. Now, there are some instances that might require an emergency situation if it's like a life or death and we need to find where they are or information. Now, that could be, again, there's that gray area. There is some allocation for looking up your clients in an emergency situation. But what it's saying is if we're ever going to look up our client in any shape or form, there has to be informed consent. And we have to obtain that consent before doing so. It holds social workers accountable for understanding risks or using technology in service delivery. So just like with any in person or anything else, anytime that social workers are implementing a service, we do assume the risk if something bad were to happen to our clients. We do have to notify clients if there's breaches in electronic records, whether that's through a hacker, whether that's through unintentional breaches. So maybe emailing, accidentally hitting reply all, so people get all of the information, those types of things. We do need to let them know when that happens. We need to avoid dual relationships within social media. So this covers a lot, making sure that we're not friends with our clients, having access to their personal lives through there, and then having personal access to your life through social media. There is some concern to like if you have an online presence where you have like Psychology Today is a good example. That is like a website that lists all available providers. And so often we'll have if we're doing private practice and social work, we'll have a Psychology Today profile because clients then can look us up. well, we might ask a client to give a positive review on there, and that could be kind of dipping the toes in that level, like pieces of coercion. So if you don't give me a good review, is that going to impact our services? Are you feeling obligated to give me a good review because you're fearful of what happens if you don't? So you have to be really mindful about that, and just kind of what having that other layer of a social media relationship can do to the therapeutic relationship. Because at the end of the day, the therapeutic relationship is what is the priority, because that's what your role is in their life. And also, it gives caution to social workers on what they post publicly on social media websites. So this can be incredibly tricky, because one of the things that we preach in social work is that we advocate, we advocate, we advocate. We give a voice to the powerless. So often that is used, or we utilize social media to advocate for others. So there might be a specific policy or political topic that we feel very passionate about, and it might align with the political party that we identify with. We're posting it, we're advocating, we're feeling passionate about something. Well, what happens then when your client sees that and they identify with a different stance? How does that then again go back and impact the therapeutic relationship? There's also pieces of, like, if you're publicly posting about your kids, where they go to school, your significant other, where they maybe work, it leaves you vulnerable to people potentially using that information against you. Or if someone's in a psychotic state and they intend to do harm to somebody, well, you've just given all of that information about your family, and your support system, that they could then potentially use against you. Same thing too with, like, if you're over 21 and you're going out and having drinks, which you are allowed to do, and your client is working through sobriety with you, and you're really preaching sobriety and a sober lifestyle because that's what their goal is, well, then seeing you out with your friends partaking in alcohol might have an adverse effect on the therapeutic relationship as well. So it gives some guidelines on kind of what to do about situations, and just giving caution of, like, you got to be really mindful. So here are some things to consider. There is there's some YouTube videos that I found, and it's called The Social Worker's Guide to the Social Media Galaxy. It's kind of like a play on The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Never seen those movies, but I know it's like a cult movie. But yeah, it kind of gives some really cheesy tips on it. This is just the graphic, but it's a little hard to read. I have it on the next slide. So you want to maintain those galactic boundaries. So discuss and set social media boundaries at the start of the clinical relationship. So it is helpful, because I know what I've encountered the most is just that clients want to be friends on social media or connect with you that way. Just even putting it in the informed consent that it's your policy or it's company's policy or the profession's policy not to have that layer of relationship in the therapeutic relationship. So sometimes having those conversations up front, if that's your stance, which it's highly encouraged to be your stance, having those discussions up front so you don't run into issues later. And then mission control, plot your course based on your social media goals. So this one, again, it's cheesy, but I do think that there's value to this. So, like, if you are utilizing your social media presence for personal stuff, so sharing your family, your friends, your social life, your adventures, whatever, knowing that that is your main goal, well, then maybe making sure that your settings are set to private. You have a lot of protection around that. If you have a professional page, so maybe it's for a private practice or just you as a social worker in general, and you want to lean into the networking, having that on public maybe is fine. But then again, being mindful of what are you posting on there and what impression are you giving others. Hubble telescope. So again, that's a play on the Hubble telescope. Contribute to building community. Sorry, computer's being weird. So you want to support others and downplay self-promotion. And again, like I mentioned this in the previous slide of using your clients to give you positive reviews on LinkedIn or Psychology Today or whatever isn't necessarily a bad thing. but it's a piece of coercion and kind of that gray water that you want to be aware of. The mega ethical cluster, so always using the code of ethics as your guide. Obviously, there's those 19 principles that were incorporated. It has a lot to say. One of your learning activities is to engage with those. So just being really familiar on the guidance that the code of ethics gives. The authentic asteroid belt, so being real, playful, and professional. I think that one's kind of dumb, but it is a guideline. Making sure your image matches what people can get in person. Yes, you may use my bathroom. Got a kid coming in. Okay, the planet know what. So making sure if you are sharing something publicly on your social media that it is from credible sources. Don't look stupid. Don't repost stupid things that have no credibility behind it, because that can really hurt your credibility as a professional. So making sure you're using valid sources. You're not feeding that kind of social media panic button with information overload from uncredible sources. So just making sure that you do your research if you choose to share something. The rest step at the end of the universe, just be reflective. Ask how a post will represent you, others in your profession. So I might have used this example once before. I use my social media for personal reasons. I have it on private. I usually just post things that my kids do that make me laugh or just random stuff. And my she was, I think, 4 at the time. My 4-year-old daughter made some really good friends with our gas station attendants at the gas station by our house that we always go to, and they loved to give her free things. So she'd often come home with like promotional fidget spinners or sunglasses with like a wine company on the side. Super harmless. She just made friends with them and they wanted to pass things along. Well, one day they decided to give her what he told me was either like a beach ball or balloon. It was like an inflatable, but it all came up packaged, and she was so excited. And when we got home, she wanted me to blow it up, and lo and behold, I blew up a giant inflatable joint. It was taller than her. It was the funniest thing to me ever, because I was like, this ain't no beach ball or balloon. I don't know what you're talking about. But she still loves today. She loves that joint. It makes me laugh so hard. She wants to take it to the pool. So I thought it was hilarious. I took a picture of her standing by it, my 4-year-old with a giant joint, and I put it in my Facebook stories. And again, remind you, my Facebook stories are private, so only my friends can see it. But then I had that moment where my stomach was kind of like uneasy about it. I was like, ooh, if you're questioning the appropriateness of this, is it really what should be on? I just thought about that of like my coworkers, or I'm friends with former students. I have a picture of my child with a joint. Yes, I know it's a joke. No, I'm not promoting marijuana use, but do people know that about me if I were to share that picture? So I took it down, because having a professional representation of myself and reflective of who I am was more important than the laughs that I gained from it. And I just texted it to the people who I knew would get a good kick out of it. So again, those things might be inherently harmless and maybe nobody would think anything of it. But if your gut says, maybe I shouldn't, definitely follow your gut, because your gut is telling you something for a reason. Black Hole Confidential. This is actually, I think, a really important one too. And it kind of goes along the line of like that humor piece and what are you using your social media for. You really want to make sure your clients feel safe. And avoid even general references to the client. So I can still remember, like, back in the early part of my social work career, this is kind of when Facebook was a little bit like you would just post updates, like random things. And I would post, again, confidential in a sense. Wasn't using names or specifics, but I would share little funny tidbits from like a day in the life of the social worker. Like one time, I got peed on by a baby on a home visit. I was holding the baby and she peed all over me. So I made some, cheeky post about like, oh, getting peed on today at a home visit wasn't on my to-do list. Ha ha ha. Like something stupid like that. And again, like not breaking confidentiality. It was going for just, let's see the humor in situations. But if you continue to do that and like not necessarily poke fun of your clients, but utilize their life stories as a piece of humor or funniness, somebody could see that and be like, they don't really respect their clients. If they're talking about their clients this way, how are they talking about me? Is this going to stop them in the future? It just doesn't give that professional self. So you want to make sure you avoid all general references. And I think it's really good practice to never publicly post anything that's referencing your day-to-day activities when it involves clients. And then the last one is security checkpoint. So being very aware of those privacy settings that are there for a reason. So it is good practice to always have, if you're practicing in the field, having your social media on private. People will use their first and middle name as their full name versus their first and last name. Again, it can be kind of frustrating if you enjoy the social media piece and you utilize it for something, maybe for brands or I don't know, like promoting something that people then can't find you. But again, at the end of the day, how would a client feel if they accidentally stumbled on something and how would that impact your therapeutic relationship? But also on the flip, protecting your information and your family safe from clients who might get upset with you or experience some sort of crisis and might not be thinking rationally. How might that make you and your family or friends vulnerable? So again, very cheesy, but they hit on good points. These are links to videos. I can put them in the Power Populi page, but or you can just Google them too. They're cheesy, but they get the point across. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up with just some ethical dilemmas to consider. So this one is focusing on checking social media profiles. So what would you do? You are a social worker in an emergency room or psych ward where a newly admitted patient indicates a desire to commit some sort of self-harm up to and including suicide. So in order to know how serious the suicide risk might be, to look up the patient's social media, you are advised to look up sometimes when I type things, I'm like, what was I thinking? So I'm just going to phrase this because apparently my typed sentence isn't real sentence. So in order to know how serious the suicide risk might be, you've been advised to look up the patient's social media, such as Facebook, Twitter, and the blogosphere to gain a better understanding of the patient's personal life and look for if there's any evidence of patterns of suicidal tendencies. Because at this point in your assessment, you have no information other than what the client is presenting in the moment. So you've been asked to go look them up to see if there's any evidence that this is a cycle or any other indication to help you make your risk assessment. So is this ethical or unethical? Because if we think back to a couple slides before, we were advised to obtain informed consent. Obviously, this person's in a crisis, so can they really give adequate informed consent? So what do you do? Well, the background searching actually does run against the established social work practice. So according to the published codes of ethics mandate that social workers must respect their clients' privacy and not track down information about them that they would wish that they would not wish to share. So technically, fundamentally looking them up to gain information that they haven't verbally disclosed with you goes against the code of ethics. However, we introduced the gray area. The emergency room workers are not necessarily wrong. And this is why. If the search is conducted in a way that is to minimize the risk, it's not to snoop just for funsies, it's to minimize the risk and protect the client. That's a completely different situation in which psychologists, social workers, whoever, just Google their patients out of simple curiosity. So if your place of employment deems it appropriate to utilize Google searches for emergency purposes, we do need to put that in the consent or informed consent for services. So in this case, if the social worker was to do it, it isn't necessarily unethical, but good practice would be to make sure your clients know that if there is a crisis situation, we will exercise our right to look up information online as minimally as possible. This is not doing a deep dive into their 2013 Facebook posts. It's to minimize the risk. Then there is some room to do so. Again, it's that gray area, but it's just good to know. Again, if you're going to consult with your supervisor to make sure that it is okay. All right, our next ethical area, whoops. Oh no, we're still talking about this. Google searches for a non-clinical reason is a habit that is not encouraged and is considered unethical. The internet does clearly give social workers ample capacity to find out information about clients independent of the clients. Social workers are advised to limit their use of that power to cases in which it's necessary and to refrain from any lurking or creeping or stalking into their clients' lives. Now, one could argue that if it's publicly posted, that it's not private, that it's easily accessible to anybody, a social worker has the right to see it because the client has put it out there for everybody to see. However, if you did uncover something that was clinically interfering, how are you going to address that with your client? Just imagine how trust could be broken. So do you really want that information? Because if you do obtain it, how are you going to come clean to your client? So food for thought. Okay, here is another scenario, the social media accounts. So you have a good relationship with one of your clients and they talk at length about their adorable cat. After a really, really good and productive session, you notice that you have a friend request from the client with a message just saying they wanted to be friends so you could see the pictures they posted of their cat. This cat has been an important part of the client's therapeutic work, and you would love to see and validate how cute the cat is. However, friending the client would also allow them to have access to your account as well. What would you do? So standard 2.09, which is maintaining the professional boundaries, says social workers who provide electronic social work services shall maintain clear and professional boundaries in their relationships with clients. Now, this is specifically referring to electronic social work services, so like e-therapy or teleservices, but it's really applicable to in-person as well. It is overwhelmingly so the best practice to not befriend clients on any social networking site and to keep all personal accounts as private as possible. And this is done to avoid a multitude of different ethical issues. So here are some of them. There's those like dual relationship and boundaries. So accepting a friend request from a client invites them into a personal space of yours that could result in unintentional harm to the client. And I've mentioned a few of these before, but so I'll kind of just buzz through them. So imagine a client who is in active recovery might feel seeing pictures from your 21st birthday celebration. You might be an active member of a group that conflicts with your client's belief system. Then they might result in transference on you about what you believe and how you view them. A client might begin to see you in a more personal light versus professional because now they know your extracurricular activities, family photos, pictures of your house, etc. And while relationship and trust is so vital to therapeutic work, you do have to remember that your role in their lives is that therapeutic professional presence, not buddy, hey, this is my life presence. And so if the client-provider relationship goes bad, the client could use that information viewed on your personal accounts against you. And I've mentioned that a couple times. Some more ethical issues around personal social media use, breaches of confidentiality. Posts can unintentionally violate clients' privacy and confidential information. So if you were taking a selfie in your office, you might accidentally have your client's biopsychosocial in the background. Somebody could zoom in, see their name, know who they are, see information, and that's a big no-no. I know when I worked at Cherry Health, we had kind of a no selfie in your office rule just to avoid those types of things. Posts about work or a client, even if you do not name the client, they could be viewed by somebody who knows the client or might feel devalued because you made a joke about your work. So things to keep in mind. You also might have the same social circles as a client that you're not aware of, and publicly posting something on social media might bring this to light. And then again, it blurs the therapeutic and professional relationship. Typed words and images stay forever. So what impact might this have on your career? In the last video, I mentioned how my MySpace profile picture is still circulating the internet from over 20 years ago. Thankfully, it's just a picture of me and a birthday cake. Nothing too scandalous, but what if it had been? That was before I was a social worker. I was still a college student, and now I can't log in and erase that. So what if that was something completely negative and then that image now lasts forever? And I've mentioned this before, so I'm not going to go into detail, but just be mindful of how asking clients to participate in your social media accounts, like writing a review for services, could unintentionally exploit the power dynamic between the client and the provider. That is ethical dilemmas around social media in a nutshell. Next class, we'll focus a little bit more around the ethics of what happens when we're actually utilizing technology to provide services. So e-services, teletherapy, because there's some ethical considerations that go into that. So that's going to be part 2 on Thursday's class. But for now, just marinate in these ethical dilemmas and being mindful of kind of your social media presence. The end. Amen. We'll see you later.